What's the craziest thing about K-pop? As someone who grew up in Korea and was scouted by extremely selective entertainment agencies, the thing that strikes me the most is how superficial it all is. The number one thing that agencies look for is good looks. I'm someone who could never dance or sing well, but I have a very stereotypically attractive face for a woman and know how to do makeup well. There were some agents that regularly camped outside my school and would catch me on my way home to convince me to audition for their agencies. I consistently told them that I couldn't sing or dance at all, and these recruiters always told me that my skills could be nurtured, that I could go into rap if I was too worried about my voice sounding sweet, and that I would have all the support I need to learn dance. The only reason they did this was because I had a good, marketable face. The pretty K-pop idols that you think of when you hear about K-pop are honestly just that, pretty. They're also extremely hard workers, but there's almost never anything intrinsic that separates them from a regular person other than good looks and intense investment into the skills of dance and music. K-pop idols do not produce their own music. Even if they are credited on a song, their contributions are almost always minimal. They don't choreograph their own dances, and usually, the choreographers can do their dances better than the K-pop idols themselves. A lot of the background vocals you hear in K-pop songs aren't even the idols themselves, it's just hired vocalists who are simply better. The crazy thing about K-pop is the fact that so much attention is concentrated into a single pretty, well-rounded idol, when the idol is really just a vessel for a dozen other people to shine through, with each of those dozen persons being better at their job than the idol themselves. It's really bizarre.
Obnoxious mother-in-law wants to supervise my honeymoon, but I fought back. I knew, from the day my husband proposed to me, that my mother-in-law was a little crazy. She was raised under strict, conservative values, meaning that she isn't comfortable at all with most of the norms around modern dating. A lot of my early dates with my husband took place inside one of our houses, with her in a nearby room or sometimes in the same room. This never struck me as particularly odd because my husband and I started off as high school sweethearts, so I thought this was just overprotective parenting, but the behavior didn't wear off. Now, we're both 26, and my mother-in-law continues to check our location and show up uninvited if she notices that we're in the same place. This is a woman who refused to let me move in with my husband, refused to let us sleep in the same hotel room on a vacation, even when we explicitly asked for 2 beds instead of 1 for our hotel room, and even tried to police me on what was appropriate for me to have in a wedding dress. I've done a pretty good job so far of finding a balance between shutting my mother-in-law down and simply ignoring her, but she recently took it too far. Basically, my husband and I have an extremely romantic getaway in Italy planned for our honeymoon. We've both saved ourselves for marriage and are extremely excited to physically move into the next phase of our relationship, but when we were opening our wedding gifts, we found that my mother-in-law had gifted us an envelope. At first, we thought it would be a check, since his family was quite wealthy, but the gift was way worse. It was a round-trip plane ticket. To Italy. On our flight, to our honeymoon. Go to part 2. Obnoxious mother-in-law wants to supervise my honeymoon, but I fought back, part 2 of 2. I should have known that something was up the moment I realized that my mother-in-law's wedding gift for us wasn't a physical package but a simple envelope, but I naively clung to the hope that she had given us cash or something. What she actually gave us was my worst nightmare, a ticket to Italy on our flight, to our airport, with the obvious intention of staying with us during our honeymoon. I was appalled. My husband's mother came up to us after we opened the gift, looking hopeful. She framed the honeymoon as a family bonding period so that the 2 most important women in her son's life could mutually be there for him. I was disgusted by the wording of that alone, but I told my mother-in-law, plainly, that she could not stay in our suite. She fought back on that, but finally, I put my foot down and said that there was only 1 bed, and she was not going to be sleeping on the couch of our honeymoon suite. She then had the audacity to tell me that I could sleep on the couch instead of her, and that's when I truly had enough. I took her plane ticket and tore it in half, telling her that if she joined us in the honeymoon suite, she would be violating her Christian views because she would watch us consummate our marriage. I got a little graphic with it, intentionally making her as uncomfortable as I possibly could, and I was honestly anxious that my husband would be mad at me with the way I was speaking so disrespectfully to his mom. However, at the end of it, his mom was bright red, practically running out of the room, and my husband leaned over and told me that it was hot to hear me talking about things like that. Fast forward to our honeymoon, and we enjoyed a wonderful 2 weeks in Italy, free of that awful woman. Good riddance.
How I got the hottest girl on campus to date me, the math nerd. I went to a very highly ranked party school to study economics and mathematics. The thing is, I've always been a little ugly. Fat gathers in my face pretty easily, so I look way chubbier than I am, and I've been told more than a few times that I have the fashion sense of a 5th grader. Years later, this has all changed with the help of my lovely girlfriend, but people always wonder how on earth I managed to ever get her to even give me a chance, given that she's what most people would call an instant 10, and I'm a 5 or 6 on my absolute best days. The thing is, though, in the beginning, I wasn't trying to get her number at all. We were in some of the same introductory courses and sat next to each other. I thought she was pretty, but I knew she would never bother with a guy like me, so I didn't try, unlike the rest of the guys in our classes. At my school, our professors were a really big fan of group projects, so we were often given the option of choosing our partners. I wanted to work with this super pretty girl, who was actually really smart, but she was swarmed as soon as partner selection started and I never even had the chance to stand up and ask her if she'd like to be in a group. Instead, I found my college buddies and we worked together. We were all in the same dorms and we were all very much nerds, so we had an insane amount of time to work on our projects. One of my passions was video editing and graphic design, so I put a lot of effort into making sure our presentations were always visually engaging and cool, and that was what got this girl's attention. In the end, she came up to me after the 5th or 6th time I'd presented around her, saying that she'd heard from others that I was the person responsible for the cool designs. She then slipped me her number, asking if I was interested in being in a group with her. Like an idiot, I asked her how that would work since the semester was ending, but she told me to call her anyway so we could do projects of our own. I went to our first date in sweats, earnestly believing that we would be getting a head start on a project for another required class. Luckily, she loved me anyway. What's the craziest internet argument you've ever seen? Online, there's an insane network of fanfiction, especially on certain platforms like Wattpad, Tumblr, and a place called the Archive of Our Own. One of the biggest sources of discourse right now is the argument between pro-shippers and anti-shippers. What's absolutely insane is that people get death threats over this. I've seen dozens of accounts deactivated because a person came out declaring their views on the matter and were severely harassed by the other side, either by spam reporting them to get their account removed or by spamming their inboxes with mean comments. The main question is this: is it ethical to write fiction that encourages problematic behavior? For example, is writing about something like murder in a distinctly romanticizing way appropriate? Or should fanfiction communities come together to dissuade the kind of content to prevent any impressionable minds from getting the wrong ideas? The pro-ship side basically says that all censorship is bad, people should be able to write whatever they want in whatever manner they want, and that problematic messages are okay to send because a person's actions, even if inspired by something else, are always their own responsibility. The anti-ship side argues that soft censorship is an important part of creating a better knit and healthier fandom space, where children can read fanfiction and see art without being pushed down dangerous paths by conflicting moral messages. Huge fandoms, from Genshin Impact to Attack on Titan, deal with this argument, and it's like there are cults within the two sides. I've never seen someone be ambivalent, they're always violently in favor of the soft censorship or violently against it. Such strong feelings are probably why it's such an issue in the first place, though I personally think that mass death threats are taking it too far. What do you think? Which side do you agree with? Restaurant refused to serve my sister because she's trans, so I retaliated with skunk spray. I live in a sleepy little town meant mainly for retired people, so the people here mostly have pretty traditional, pretty conservative values. The issue with this is that my sister is trans, so we often get a lot of dirty looks and annoying comments. I try my best to always accompany her when going out so I can defend her, since she's a little shy, but this one worker took it too far. Basically, I ordered 2 identical sandwiches, one for me and one for my sister, and the worker went, "Really? If you're going to pretend to be a girl, at least eat like one." I was stunned and told the guy to please just give us our food, but the dude laughed and said he would only give my sister a meal if she either changed her outfit or ordered a more womanly portion. At this point my sister was close to tears because the guy was shaming her for not just her gender identity but also her weight, so I told him that we were going to be leaving. He laughed and told us to have fun in Fantasyland as we left. Here's where I might be a bit of a jerk. The place this happened was at a food truck stand. The food truck is left there overnight when the workers leave, so, for the sake of my sister, I bought skunk scent spray on Amazon and sprayed it all over the truck. I returned the next day with my friends and it not only smelled rancid but there were no customers. The food truck worker looked furious, but I quietly laughed and left before he could recognize me. Since then, I've seen the food truck in different areas, always with the same overpowering stench. I'm considering spraying it again to keep the smell extra strong. What do you think? What is the biggest relationship green flag you've ever seen? Once upon a time, I was dating this amazing guy. We had a strong connection, shared the same sense of humor, and overall were really supportive of each other's hobbies. One day, he called me in a panic, explaining that he was stuck on the side of the road and desperately needed a ride. Without giving it a second thought, I grabbed the car keys and drove to his location. I didn't have a car, so I had to drive his. I had his permission to do so, obviously. So I was driving down the highway, close to where he was, when his car suddenly started acting up. Mechanical failure, I found out. With a sinking feeling in my gut, I realized that I couldn't continue driving the car safely. I felt terrible because the guy I'd been in a relationship with right before this one always yelled at me for stuff like this and blamed it on me, even if there was nothing I could do. I really thought the same thing would happen. So I panicked and called the one person who always had my back, my mom. I explained the situation, and she quickly arrived on the scene like a superhero swooping in to save the day. She took my brother with her, and he swapped keys with me to stay with my boyfriend's failing car while my mom and I went in her car to retrieve my stranded boyfriend. It took a while, but we finally found him safe and sound a little while later. The thing was, I was still seriously anxious about what he'd say. What would his reaction be? How would he handle the news of the car issues? I told him what had happened, expecting him to either break up with me on the spot or start yelling at me, but all he asked was, "Are you okay?" My mom overheard and told me that my boyfriend was a keeper. He's not my boyfriend anymore, but that's because he's now my husband of 10 years. Keeper indeed. People who actually let their mom count to 0. What happened next? This one day, when I had a not so great day, I came home feeling all grumpy. I walked in with this negative energy and started acting all snappy and crabby. Not my finest moment, I'll admit. My mom, being the patient soul she is, put up with it for a while. But then, she reached her limit. I can't quite remember what set her off, but she asked me to do something, and I flat out refused. That's when things got intense. She started counting down. 3, 2, and before she could say 1, I decided to beat her to it. And I snapped at her, in the brattiest and most obnoxious tone ever, saying 1, which? Yes, I cursed at my own mom. Yes, I have never forgotten. Immediately, I knew I was in trouble. There was this moment of silence, and then I saw it in her eyes. Raw, unbridled rage. I tried to apologize right away, pleading for forgiveness. But I had messed up big time, and there were consequences coming. Even though I was taller than her, she somehow managed to scoop me up, plop me down in a chair, and firmly instructed me to stay put. Her voice had this mix of icy coldness and fiery intensity. How is that even possible? Next thing I knew, she returned with a new bar of ivory soap. You can imagine what came next. She jammed that soap into my mouth, and it tasted awful. It had this bitter, soapy flavor that made me want to gag. But it also had a sickly sweet undertone that made the whole situation even more unpleasant. That's the story of how I discovered that Dr. Pepper tastes like a bizarre concoction of Robitussin, ivory soap, prune juice, and carbonated water. Trust me, it wasn't a flavor I'd ever want to experience again. I'm pretty sure I got grounded too, but you know what? That intense moment of fear and discipline my mom instilled in me, it actually did the trick. Lesson learned. What are some guy-only secrets girls don't know? My dad was a brave soldier who fought in the Pacific during World War II. He grew up in the Bronx and had never left his neighborhood before, so going to New Guinea was a huge change for him. Many years later, when he was lying in a hospital bed, almost at the end of his life, he shared something dark about what he saw out on the battlefield. He told us about how his young friends and fellow soldiers behaved when they were wounded in battle and finally had to face their own deaths. In those moments, as they realized what was about to come next, they always cried out for their mothers, not their fathers. He explained how these young soldiers, who were still just kids, would scream "Mama" and "Mom, help," as they were being harmed by other equally young, usually equally desperate young men. My dad said it was a heartbreaking realization for him. They were all just young, innocent souls caught up in the horrors of war. In his arms, he often was responsible for holding those brave young soldiers as they spoke their last words. They were always asking for their mothers. He says he can still hear it sometimes, and that it's the exact same way a kid calls out for their mom. Those soldiers sought comfort and solace from the only person in their lives who had given them life and unconditional love. I could tell that this deeply affected my dad throughout his entire life. He lived a long life, and he considered himself fortunate to have survived the war, but the memories of those young soldiers and their cries for their mothers never left him. He was always more distant, after the war, and I think it's because he understood that children don't really see their parents equally. It's a devastating thing to realize, experience, and internalize. Rest his soul. What video is innocent, but becomes terrifying when you learn the story behind it? My mom and I recently watched an interesting show called 2020. One time, they were telling the story of a woman who went out for a night of fun but unfortunately, never came back. It was really mysterious. The show talked about how she went to this guy's apartment, but then the hotel footage showed her leaving shortly after she arrived. The guy in the apartment insisted that he didn't do anything to her. They interviewed him a lot, and he was the last person to see her alive. He told the police that they stopped at a gas station, and she started talking to another guy there. According to him, she got into that guy's car and left. He acted all emotional, saying that if he had known, he wouldn't have let her go. But it turns out that there was way more to the story. They had footage of this guy at his job a couple of days later. It was really ordinary footage, nothing special. He was just doing his job, rolling a cooler on a cart and putting it in a freezer. He worked at a food production company, so it made sense. But then, when the police spoke to his boss and went over all the footage, something interesting happened. When they reached the part of the footage where he put the cooler in the freezer, his boss told the police to stop. She said, "Hold on a minute, those coolers are only used for granola bars, and they don't need to be stored in the freezer." And here's the shocking part, the girl's body was actually inside that cooler. It's really sad and scary to think about. The guy had taken the cooler with her body and burned everything in a barrel down the alley a few days later. He even cleaned his van with bleach before the police could search it. It was like something out of a movie. I'm not sure what exactly happened to him, but I hope he rots in jail like he deserves. What wedding made you think? They are not going to last. So, my friend had her wedding recently, and let me tell you, it was an interesting experience. Before the big day, she told me how she found her fiancé annoying and didn't really like him. Big yikes already. On the day of the wedding, things started to get even more uncomfortable. During the rehearsal dinner and wedding combo, she seemed visibly uneasy. You could just feel the awkwardness in the air. The real drama started on the actual wedding day because everyone began finding out that she was crying the entire morning. I walked in halfway through, when the worst of it was supposedly over, and it still felt like a never-ending sobfest. She was so upset that she didn't even get her makeup done. She then refused to get dressed. This wound up causing a delay of about 40 minutes, but we finally told her she could either go out for her wedding or formally end things before they fully started, but that she had to make a decision. She chose to proceed with the ceremony. When it was finally time for the vows, she went on and on for what felt like an hour, saying all sorts of things that were not your typical wedding vows. She had prepared a whole 11 pages of inappropriate things, mentioning friends, family, and even her husband's parents and sisters. It was really awkward and not what you would expect at a wedding. And get this, when it came time to say I do, she hesitated. She took almost a full minute before finally mumbling something like, yeah, okay, yeah I do. Talk about a tense moment. There are so many more details I could share, but let's just say it was a painful and uncomfortable wedding from start to finish. I don't want to jinx it, but I have a feeling this marriage might not last too long. We're only 1 month in, and I'm guessing it won't go beyond 6 months.